It's quorum, it's quorum, it's quorum. My guest today is Lora Krsulich. Lora taught me a whole new dimension to the practice of law, and that's about trust. She is one of the most high trust lawyers I've met, and it shows in her career success. After clerking in the Central District of California and the Ninth Circuit, Lora litigated at Susman Godfrey before joining Goodwin as an associate, and she is the first associate on the podcast, and it's because Lora is a rising star. Here's Lora. Okay, Lora, I am very excited to have you on here. And you have one of the most unique stories of anyone I know in law. And one of the parts of your stories that I still think about because it's such a vivid picture it paints in my mind, and it says a lot about your trajectory, was the day you went into your dad for his last day of work. Can you share something about that story?
Of course. And I'll just say, Harm, I'm very thankful to be on the podcast and to you for taking the time to get to know me and to ask questions in the way that you do with so much insight and care. So my dad, he worked as a lithographer when he first arrived in San Francisco. He had a community of people who were also working in that same lithography company and who placed him there. He was a printer. And he worked there for 44 years before he retired, when my sister and I were in high school. So he had us come, to work his last day, to just kind of see where he'd been working. We didn't go there regularly at all. It was this a printing plant. And I walked in, and the thing that stood out to me was just, so he worked on the same printer for, his majority of his career. And on that printer were little pieces of masking tape that he'd put everywhere. So that this printer was just like covered in masking tape. And, every piece of tape had his initials on it, like RK, and then the date. And when my sister and I asked him what that was, he said, well, that's just reflecting, all of the repairs I've made to this printer over the course of, my time here. And, I don't think we talked much about it, but that image really stood out to me, like this very, it was so visible to me how much of his work had just belonged on this one machine and how much he cared so much about it. And the other thing about my dad is like, he didn't have to do that. Like, he didn't have to put that masking tape on there, but he took pride in showing what he had done, and recording it. And that was really important to me. And, I'm so glad to be able to give that, to recall that memory. It's an important one to me and something that I take forward in my own career.
How did it, when you saw that, how did it make you think about how far you had come?
Oh, well, I always think about this when I talk to my parents about what I'm doing. I'm so proud of what I've been able to accomplish in my legal career. And I also think about like some of these similarities, right? And why I've been successful and what they've instilled in me. Like this idea that you need to take pride in your work and you need to take ownership of it is something that's very important to me now. And so like I've come a long way in that, I'm a lawyer. I have a professional degree. I have opportunities that, they never, had for themselves. But it's also just this like common value system that I'm carrying forward.
And so what was the point at which you said to me that I had this whole other career before law school. So can you share the story of that other career and then how that led you to law school?
Yeah. So I was always, ever since I was in high school, I was very interested in student government and the way that, people would organize themselves to try to come up with solutions to problems. I had always thought, well, whatever had been existing could be improved upon, right? So like at that very early age, it was like, we used to have student dances. Okay, how can you make these student dances more enjoyable for people, right? I carried that through in my interest in that type of activity through to college, where I majored in political science. And then afterward, I had an opportunity to go work in Newark, in New Jersey, working on prisoner reentry for the Office of Prisoner Reentry in Newark, New Jersey. And that was super motivating to me because the problem, as it was presented to me at that time, was there are many different people in Newark and organizations in Newark that are working on prisoner reentry, but they are not coordinated in any way by the city hall in Newark, and they also do not have federal money flowing into those programs. So, these mom and pop shops, these storefront churches, they're trying to do the best they can with the resources that they have, but there's no central coordinating system. And so that was my opportunity coming in as a graduate student, was to try to start to coordinate that system with the other people in City Hall who are working on economic and housing development. Taking that idea of like, there's always something to improve upon. Like, what can you bring to that system? I ended up thinking, I ended up finding out my strength was in grant writing and like working with the community to like propose these innovative programs and get them funded. And so we ended up winning more than $7 million in federal and private grants while I was there. And then I had a mentor at Newark suggest to me that I could take my mentality, my drive, and apply it to law school, and that I could be a successful lawyer, something that I really had not thought about before that was put in my mind. And I'm sure we'll get into it more, but I took that to heart and didn't think I would be successful, but I promised her I would apply. And that's what I did.
At what point did you start thinking yourself like, okay, let's say you got into Berkeley. What point did you start thinking yourself, hey, like, I'm getting some feedback here that I might be onto something? Was it at that point? Was it later on? Like, what were your reactions to entering law school?
So, my initial reaction to entering law school was just like, fear, truly fear. Like, if I'm going to be honest with you, I was, accepting a huge amount of debt going into law school and willing to add that onto my plate. But, knowing that I would have to repay that. And in order to do that, I needed to be successful, right, in law school and in the career beyond. And so that's how I started out with law school. And I think a lot of that first year was driven by that fear. And then it started to click for me in my second year when, I had the first year's grades behind me. And I'd started to build a community of people. I wrote onto the law review and I started to feel more comfortable. Like, I had a community who was also interested in the law, who were serious about, doing this work. And it just felt like, okay, there are people in here who are like me, who believe in me and what I can do. And it started to feel a little more comfortable at that point in time.
Were there other first-gen lawyers or first-gen students among your peers?
Yeah, we had Berkeley Law had a group called First Generation Professionals. It had started the year before I joined at Berkeley, and then I was a co-chair of that group at law school. And so, yes, in that group there were other first generation lawyers who we'd meet kind of monthly to do different programming. I remember one of the things that we did was we hosted like a wine night, because and this may be of interest in recruiting. I remember going through OCI, and I was invited to a dinner. And at the dinner, the partners who were there wanted me to select a bottle of wine for the table. And I had never done that before. We were in this fancy restaurant. The wine list was extensive, and I really had no clue at all. And so we developed, after that experience, we developed this programming at the First Generation Lawyers group, of just like a fun event, like how to do a wine tasting and how to recommend wine and what to look for in wine and, what to talk about when you're talking about wine. And, so we had our community of people that were, doing things tailored to first gen lawyers. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What was your experience? I saw you summer at Boise. What was that experience like for you?
It was awesome. I loved that experience at Boise. The highlight of that summer was, as a summer associate, getting to work on a trial team. It was one of the first cases tried in California about what would happen to frozen embryos when a couple was going through a divorce. And the firm had taken on that matter pro bono, and, was open to support from, anywhere in the firm, including summer associates. And it was just so awesome to be on a trial team at that early stage, like to sit in on witness prep, like help with witness direct outlines, and also witness direct outlines, meeting with the client, but also just like the type of legal research that you were able to do, with constitutional issues around, reproductive rights. And that was an amazing summer. I loved it very much. So yeah, good experience.
But you didn't end up going to a law firm right after law school because you ended up clerking. So how did that come to be?
So with clerking, so I had done well in law school, and I know the school, the Berkeley, like strongly promoted students to go into judicial clerkships because of the benefit it could have in the long run for your career. And so that was an opportunity available to me. I don't think I knew at the time just how meaningful of an experience it would be when I applied. I just knew, like, this is something that, if you have the grades, you should do, right? Like, you should do this. And so I ended up, accepting clerkships, the Central District of Clerkships with Judge Gutierrez, and then at the Ninth Circuit with Judge Wardlaw. And I want to pause too, because I think it's helpful for maybe law students going through this process, because now that I have these two clerkships, right, it's in my background, but it certainly was not inevitable when I was in law school that I would be able to clerk. I think at that time, you would apply and you weren't sure at all, what judges were looking for, in a resume, or why they've selected certain students to come in an interview and not. And I remember, I wanted that gold star so badly, right? I really wanted it. And so I remember applying to like every judge on the Western Seaboard. And I printed out the applications, and I had them all over my parents' kitchen. They were like, on the counters, on the dining table, and, on the other, they were just everywhere. And my mom and I were just assembling them and putting them in packets, and, we sent them off. And I just remember thinking, like, I don't know what this process is. Like, I am really hopeful that something positive comes out of this, and I really want this. But it felt like a crapshoot, right? At the time I was going through it.
And I should also take this opportunity to call out that for the entire time in law school, you lived with your parents?
Yeah, so I lived with them the first 2 years of law school, and then I ended up getting a studio apartment at Berkeley but still spending most of my time with my parents because, like, let's be honest, like my mom was a way better cook than I ever could be. And it was just the comfort of having them there was, very important for me during law school.
But that's also pretty unusual because, I mean, like, it's all the more unusual because you had you had worked before. It's like you were like a grown adult who had like a job in another country. But, because I imagine any number of students, even ones who had local roots, weren't living at home in law school. So I think that is a pretty remarkable sacrifice you took because my understanding is that was to manage the cost, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And to get your mom's cooking, it sounds like, but
yeah, no, exactly. Like, it was, going in. So I mentioned the cost of going into law school and the pressure I felt from that. But, when I applied, I still had loans from my graduate degree. So I have a graduate degree, a master's in public administration that I got while I was working in Newark. And so I had those loans going into Berkeley law education and knew that I would add the law loans on top of that. And so, I understood those risks and like really wanted to minimize the costs while I was going through law school. So, so that's a choice I made, right? And we grew up in San Bruno. I grew up in San Bruno. So it's about an hour commute to Berkeley on the BART. And that's what I did. And sort of just integrated it into my schedule and made it work for me. Like I would read on the BART. I would get there really early at school and kind of, I'd let the day kind of flow and, get my coffee and do my reading then. And I don't know. I very much enjoyed it, even though, I knew it wasn't as convenient as some other students where you could just live right next to campus or something like that.
And then going back to, you mentioned the clerkship. So you clerk for Central District of California, and then you immediately after that clerked for the Ninth Circuit. Tell me about the impact of those two experiences.
Yeah. So for me, it was so important to get to know those judges personally, Judge Gutierrez and Judge Wardlaw. And by doing that, it improved it's drastically improved my comfort level with being a litigator, right? Because I ended up coming to know those judges' families, like who they are, what their belief system is and what they see, that they want to see from young lawyers developing in their careers. And for me, it demystified the whole process of practicing law, right? Because now when I'm going into court, I recognize that yes, those judges, have a job and they take that very seriously, but they're all people at the end of the day, right? Everybody that's on the bench is a person who has a life and a family and who wants to see lawyers develop in their career. And having that recognition forefront when I'm thinking about litigating, it has made the whole process less intimidating and more enjoyable for me. Because I see those judges as people, not as some sort of like adversaries or like
Someone on a pedestal.
Someone on a pedestal. Exactly.
Yeah. I think, being behind the scenes in chambers does help me demystify. I was very fortunate to have, two externships with two fantastic federal judges. I didn't clerk, but that already was, I'm very grateful for those experiences, and they did much, like you're saying, to demystify and give me a lot of confidence. Were there any practice points or, for someone who went straight through practice at, a peer firm to the firms you've practiced at, what is the benefit or perspective that you have that somebody else wouldn't have? Like anything practical in that way or actual?
Well, no. Your externship is actually, so I had an externship with Judge Breyer in Northern District of California. And it evoked that memory for me of Judge Breyer used to have these like bagel mornings on Fridays where he'd get all the judges together on that same floor and he'd bring in his externs and everybody would just mingle around. And so it's just highlighting like how important any sort of experience in chambers is, like particularly if your judges open to involving everyone in chambers. But in terms of like practical experience that would be translatable, for the district court in particular, there was just such a limited amount of time to do the work that we had in front of us. So Judge Gutierrez would have this whiteboard in chambers where he would list out all of the motions that needed to be decided that week. And it was very important to him to decide to issue orders in a timely manner and to be efficient about it. And because he understood his role on the district court as these parties need a decision from me. And so I needed to give you that decision. I don't want them to wait. And so, the motions on the board, there'd be 10 motions that needed to be decided, at the time I was clerking. And there were 2 of us clerks, which meant, we'd each have about 5 motions each. And so if you're thinking as a litigator, right, like how do I want, if I need to communicate, I need to communicate the law and the facts that are in my favor in the most efficient way possible. How am I going to do that for law clerks and judges who have a very short amount of time to decide my case? And I think that influences, right, the way you write, the way you use graphics, right, and the way you simplify your language. Because, if someone opens up your brief and it's just like very dense and has a lot of jargon and they know, they have like 4 hours, right, to dig in. You just want to make it as simple as possible for them to come to the right decision for your client. And I think anyone can kind of take that advice and become a better litigator with it.
Yeah, that's good. Good to make a simple, clear story for why you should prevail. I think relatedly, the big insight from the then Chief Judge James Holderman of the Northern District of Illinois that I externed for, something that he impressed upon us again and again was always using every opportunity he can to advocate. So he would point out, or he would point out lawyers that would do this skillfully, where even on a simple status call, they would just use every opportunity to subtly, there's an art to this. There's maybe something procedural, you want to say non-substantive about the conversation. Always finding some subtle way to advocate for your client's position, to always be advocating. So I think that's definitely made a lasting impact on my perspective. Because these judges, they just see so many advocates and they see what's effective, and then specifically what's effective with a judge. And so they're the best source on, and here's what's persuasive or clarifying ways to communicate. So
yeah. And I mean, along those lines, I've been thinking about this more like what is in your control as a litigator, and how can you tilt that into your favor in the best way possible, right? So he talked about it as advocating at every opportunity you get, but I mean, I think about it as like, okay, can I get there? Like, just thinking practically, what's available to me. Can I get to court early, right? And acquaint myself with the location where I'm going to be seated, and the microphones and the technology, and and just get myself situated in a space so I feel comfortable with it. Like, I mean, it's something well within my control. It's not anything to do substantively, but I think it's going to make me a better advocate, right? Because I know that I'll be prepared when the judge comes out, and I'll be able to read the room better, right? So yeah, I think there are so many different ways that, you don't think about in law school, right? But that you can be a better advocate for your clients.
yeah, I exerted for Judge John Dara, and he was a big stickler for being on time. He was always on time, and he would let counsel, if counsel was late, he would let him know, hey, like this, you're having an impact on a whole bunch of people by doing that. I've tried to heed I've not been the most punctual person in my life professionally. So that I've don't think I've lived up to his expectations in that way. But another thing he would do that was really interesting is he would, I'm trying to remember the context he would say this to counsel, It would be early in, it would be like, I think for the first status hearing. And so he would say, just oh so casually, thumbing through the papers, he'd say, counsel, are you, this I think primarily would be to plaintiffs. He's like, are you, have you familiarized yourself with Federal Rule of Civil Procedure Rule 11? And so that would just like, everyone in the room would be like, oh my God, what? What did you throw down? And he wasn't implying that there was something deficient in the pleadings in that way, but inviting people to consider carefully how they were framing their arguments, if there was a substantial basis for their positions. I think that's something I've been struck with. There's judges like Judge Dare. There's also I'm blanking on his name. Oh, Judge Shader of the Northern District of Illinois too, who's like Judge Dare. He's also passed away. Judge Shader was a real character, and so he would really push back on like particularly things like affirmative defenses or objections in discovery. Like let's say like standard objection is we don't have sufficient information or belief to whatever that would be, and he would really challenge people like you don't have a basis for just like the most basic assertions, like you don't have a basis for saying like you're in Chicago right now, right? So like he would just say like that is an absurd position to take. Like the lawyerly world is not different than the real world. In the real world, we think that's a ridiculous position, so don't say things like that.
Yep.
I think that's something I've really admired in judges is that they teach you how to become more of a first principles thinker and really think, okay, like I know the rules. I know there's conventions that people use when they talk with the rules. The rules are this certain way, and we can go back to these original rules and these sources for our decisions about how to litigate. So yeah. A lot we can learn from judges if we're paying attention to in that way.
Yeah. Well, I've been thinking about this particular issue with discovery in the context of AI and the development of AI, and thinking through like if AI could spit out your discovery responses, like you probably have a problem, right? Like if it, on information and belief, whatever it is, the boilerplate language, if you're not adding any value as a lawyer, like why are you doing the discovery responses at all, right? Like you have to think through what information you have, what information, you can get from your client and how you're going to present that information, like that's relevant to the case and to advance your client's goals, right? You can't just say, I have nothing of value, because that's going to end up biting you when you get into litigation, right? And you need to present an affirmative case for your client, right? You need to be able to think strategically about discovery. That's something about litigating that's always stood out to me, is just like the overuse of boilerplates. Like, why do we do this? Like, there's a way to think through this. It's, think through it like an advocate, like you would write a brief, right? That's discovery. You can do discovery in the same way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How did you come? So you're the firm you chose after your clerkship was Susman Godfrey. How did you come to choose Susman?
Yeah, so I first heard about Susman through Nick Spear, who clerked for Judge Gutierrez before me. We overlapped for 1 week, and Nick, if anyone knows him, is wonderful at staying in touch with people and is a deeply caring person. And so he stayed in touch with me through my clerkships and talked to me about Susman and how you got these early opportunities as a litigator to be in court, to stand up, to depose, to start doing depositions like very early on in your career. And that was all extremely exciting to me. Like that's how I wanted to litigate. I'd had this career before law school. And so it was important to me to not feel like, instead of putting it in a negative, I'll put it in a positive. It was important to me to feel like my experiences and the amount of time and vigor I'd spent in law school was going to be valued at the firm, right? I was going to be trusted to do things. to do, real work. And so that's what Nick was saying about Sussman. And that was absolutely my experience there. My first month of litigating, I was taking a expert witness deposition at Cravath, and was an antitrust expert. I'd with the partner, I'd read through his report and identified areas that we wanted to direct our questions to, and that's what I did. It was like, I think I started on November 4th, and I was taking that deposition in the middle of December. So, it was, that's what attracted me to that firm and why I chose them, right after clerking.
And, so I think a running theme that you had been underscoring was some of the challenges you felt in heading into new experiences that you didn't have any context for, any guidance on how to navigate. So that was true for you entering law school. You had a lot of trepidation because, hey, I mean, like, you'd worked in the real world, so you knew what, like, $200,000 in student loans, like, when you're 22 or whatever, or 21, even if maybe you're making the decision at that point to go to law school straight out of college, you've only been in college. You don't really have any sense like, yeah, sure, throw that debt on too. I got this other debt, throw that debt on too. Like, it's just numbers, right? It doesn't really mean anything. But you had a very real sense of like, okay, like, here's what it takes to like earn these dollars and hand them off, for a loan. So some understandable trepidation, but you had trepidation there. And then you described, going to your clerkships, you're like, hey, like, I don't really know what I'm doing here, like what the significance of this is. What was the experience like heading into Sussman? Like, were you feeling confident? Were you feeling anxious? Like, tell me about, or maybe a mixture of the two. Like, tell me about like what your headspace was heading into that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was very energized. I think that was my headspace going into Sussman. After learning about the firm through Nick, and then also Krista Packman, who was a former Gutierrez clerk as well, I met the people and I was excited to work with that group of people. But I also learned more about Steve Sussman and his philosophy to litigating. And what stood out for me was his idea that you need to demystify the practice of law. And the way that you do that is by giving lawyers experiences early on. So there's, by demystifying, I think what he meant is there's nothing magical about taking a deposition, right? Like, you need to prepare, you need to understand the documents, you need to write out concise questions. You need to talk to your team about what you want to get from the witness. But if you're willing to put in the work and the time to do that deposition, you can be just as successful as someone who has taken, dozens of depositions. Same thing for oral argument. Like, sure, you do need to build up your judgment and comfort over time, but starting out, if you understand the law and you've practiced and you've gone through and done, moots and talked to your colleagues about it, like, you can be successful at oral argument, right, starting out. And I don't know, that whole idea was very energizing to me. I think particularly someone who did not have lawyers in their family, right, that the practice of law could be something that you can do and that people will trust in you to do it early on. Like, that's where I wanted to be, right? I wanted to be around people like that. So yeah, I think I was energized.
How else have you used that idea of, hey, how to demystify a process? Seems like that's a big picture concept for you. Are there other spheres in your life where you've applied this concept of, hey, I can just start working towards this, or start making this change now?
Yeah. So I think it's just like, for me, it's always a battle with time, because I think demystifying goes with time. Like, I firmly believe that anything that you want to understand, you can understand with time. So, and the effort. So, now, Goodwin and embarking on a practice, that's focused on intellectual property, and having to, read patents and understand them. when I initially read a patent, right, like it doesn't come naturally to me. Like I don't have the science background, but I know that if I take the time, right, to digest it and ask questions about it and talk to people who are familiar with the science, that I can break it down and learn it. And I think it's hugely important to have that mentality as a trial lawyer, because will have to teach that patent to a jury or a judge who's not as familiar with it. Right. And so, I love that part about my practice. It's one of my, and when I noticed that, when I'm doing problems like that, where I have to break down complicated work and translate that's the part that's most enjoyable for me.
How do you balance like this time is concept is pretty interesting. I'm gonna follow up on this. I mean, I think something that's a challenge when you're practicing, when you're developing yourself at any stage, but particularly when you're developing yourself, is balancing how much you try to figure out your own and then how much you turn to an expert. What's your formula for that you developed over time?
It is really my number one struggle, because my instinct is sort of to isolate myself and kind of burrow. I'm like making this gesture like with my hands. But it's like, cause I do like this process of like engaging with research and documents and writing my own notes and translating it. But it's a muscle that I've learned over time and exercised over time. Is just, you can bring in people into that process and just, you know, so I always thought, oh, I have to have the right answer or an understanding before I go out and ask people about some technical part of what I'm doing. And I'm still learning that like I can go up to someone in the middle of my process and just say, hey, can you help me think about this? Like, this is how I am thinking about the law in this way. It seems like there's cases that say this and cases that say that. What do you think? And just listening to them. And it doesn't mean that they're right and I'm wrong, or, they understand so much better than I do. It's just a process of like learning the material. And so, I, I, I think the question was like, when do I do that? I try to do it earlier and earlier on than I had done before. And I do think it makes the whole learning process more efficient when you have other people coming in and offering their guidance or ideas earlier on.
And you also mentioned this concept of using time effectively, and I think that ties into something I understand that is a key part of understanding you and your trajectory is your life as a parent. And we talked a little about this before, but I'd love to hear about your experience of what was the before and after of having kids, with how it impacted how you practice.
Yes. So I have a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old. And the process of becoming a mom and litigating as becoming a mom has really changed how I do things. I think before I had my oldest son, William, one thing I really liked to do was, and you can judge for yourself whether you think it's a bad habit or not, but I love my work and I like doing it. And so I would kind of let it hang over, right? So I'd let the day go. I research, and then I'd, think, oh, I could do this later in the evening, or I could do it, over the weekend. And it wasn't really a problem for me, because I was fine to do it at any point in time. I liked what I was doing. So, I'd create my own space. And, when I had William, and I realized I made the choice that, I wanted to spend the majority of my weekends and at least a block of time in the evening with him. I recognized that attitude of allowing this work to hang over was no longer going to be acceptable, having made the choice that I did to spend the time with William in the way that I wanted to. And so I had to become more effective day to day, right? I didn't have that luxury that I had anymore.
And so then how did that change? I mean, what else changed with your practice then? Is it just about like, how do you get more done in less time? Because you like, you're still, your performance doesn't change over time. You're still like, as you progress, you're getting more and more senior and more responsible for, um, more in your cases. So like, how have you been able to get more done in the same amount of time?
Yeah. So I think a lot more about what I do earlier on in an assignment. So let me give an example. So when I have a task that I'm turning to, one of the first things I do is try to triage the assignment and think through, okay, what is it that I don't know that I need to know in order to do this assignment well? And rather than, digging in and then having those questions come up as I go, I try to front load them and ask those questions early on so I can start, pushing them out to the people who I need answers from. And, as a second layer pass, I look through and try to think, okay, are there tasks here that can be assigned to other people on this team? So that I don't keep everything on my plate. And, can I ask for help here? And I think that makes the whole process more efficient, right? Because I'm being realistic about the time I have and recognizing early on, where I need to get help, from other people on my team. And I do think that allows me to do more with less time.
Mm-hmm. And you had gone to trial not long after having your first, right? So from Williams. So then what was that experience like?
Yeah. So it was with Bennett. So Bennett was born on, January 1st, 2023. I ended up going to trial in December of that year. And then, this past year I went to trial twice in July and in October. So, 3 trials in his first 2 years of life. Um, and, I wrote a piece about it, for PLI and I'm still kind of processing it. Um, but one thing that comes to mind is just, um, you know, it's very difficult to be able to balance both. And I think you have to be true to yourself about what you can do and what you can't do in the amount of time that you have. And that realizing that has been very helpful for me. So like, if when I'm going to trial, right? And the most important thing I've learned is when you say you're going to do something, you need to do it. You need to follow through and do it on time when you're going to trial because everything's happening very quickly. There are a lot of people that are working on the team that need your deliverables. And so communication has been important, right? Because I know how much time I'm going to have. I'm being more realistic about what I can do. I can say, okay, I can get this draft by this date and really commit to that and know that I can do that. And, it's been very important for me to be more realistic about my time and to also be very effective with the time that I have so I can meet those promises.
Mm-hmm. And is that advice, generalized? What do you think then that if there's another person who is, a parent with young children heading into trial, is there anything else you would add for tips for them for how to be able to make trial a success for them?
Yeah, I think there's a whole flip side of that where you need to ask for support for the kids. So, for me, I had that conversation early on with my husband and with my mom, and with, about, I really wanted to do this, right? I wanted to go to trial. How are we going to do all these things without anyone burning out or feeling and resentful, right? So we had that conversation. We decided to, and so I had that conversation internally, but I also had it with other friends who have kids and are litigators as well about what they do. And through that whole process, someone suggested, hiring childcare on Saturdays and just having regular childcare support on Saturdays. Someone who can always come, and if you need to work, you can work. If you want to be with your kids, you can, and that person can help with other things that are around the house. And it was that like discussion and the decision to bring on more childcare on Saturdays was like hugely beneficial to me, right? Because, I recognized, I had another day as like a safety valve, right? If I needed more time to do my work, but it also was a relief for, my husband who was going to take care of the kids every other time, right? To know that, okay, there was going to be support on Saturdays, right? I'm going to have support and someone can come in. And then we obviously invested in daycare, to make sure that, the burden of childcare didn't fall on, him exclusively, and just had a lot of conversations about how to make these changes in our home life to make it possible for me to devote as much time as I wanted to preparing for trial and then going away, during the time that I needed to go away, and be totally absent from the house. So this communication was very important, being realistic about how much time I'm going to have to dedicate at home.
I think another transformation I'm hearing your story is one from going alone, trying to do your best to figure things out by yourself, to community orientation. And that's how you were doing the upfront work on a new matter to figure, okay, working back to the ultimate outcome. What do I need to know and who can work on what? So that's a community oriented, team oriented approach. And then this other community oriented, team oriented approach of finding the help you need for childcare and taking care of the household. So, is that a pattern you've noticed in yourself as moving more and more over time to being more embedded in communities?
Yeah, it is definitely a pattern that I've noticed in myself, particularly in the last, 5 years. And I wonder, saying that, whether having kids and needing to do that, needing to rely on community, has encouraged that behavior more than I had needed to do it before I had kids, because William's about to turn 5 at the end of January. So it sort of tracks that timeline. Yeah, and to tie it back to what we'd been talking about earlier, I always thought that asking for help was a sign. I'd thought before that asking for help was a sign of weakness, a sign that you couldn't handle something, you didn't know what you were doing, and people would know that you didn't know what you were doing, right? And I think that ties back to being first generation. And I've been thinking about this experience. I'll give one example. I remember applying to college, and at the time I knew I would need to rely on federal student aid, FAFSA. And there was a group that was, had this scheme where they were like selling FAFSA forms in my school district. I went to a public school in San Bruno, and we were so desperate for information about financial aid that we ended up paying some money to this group to buy a FAFSA form and get information about federal student aid and colleges. And, that's a long time ago, but something like that stuck with me, right? I needed help. I asked for help and I got, swindled, right? And so, I thought for a long time, I have to do my own work and put in the time in to become an expert without relying on other people. And I think it's a huge help to me that I've let that go as much as I have in the last 5 years, and been more willing to admit, where I need help and where I can develop. I think it's made me a better lawyer, better mom, hopefully, but it's also made it more enjoyable, right? Because I really like connecting with people. I like connecting with people. I like learning. I like hearing about other people's ideas. And, so doing it, I think, has been, it's hard, but it's a huge success to me, huge benefit.
That's such an interesting story for you to say because this FAFSA scam, because a reaction someone could have had to that is, oh, people out there, like I'm not connected, and I'm on the outside, and so I can't trust other people. I have to figure things out on my own, and so you could have retreated further into yourself. And this is actually something I was just thinking about. I just made a LinkedIn post about this Friday because it's something I've started to notice professionally as a legal recruiter, that there's a dimension to practice, and then also through the podcast. So both from recruiting and from the podcast, observing, the conversations I have with people in exploring potentially doing a podcast episode, or what I've learned from people that are successful, is a dimension of practice is trust. There's, I think, any number of very successful lawyers who are not very high trust. They don't trust opposing counsel. They don't trust judges. They don't trust their own colleagues. And I've observed that. I think it's particularly common in litigation. I've never practiced as a transactional lawyer, but I have observed it in some people that are transactional lawyers too. I think there's an analog. And then conversely, there are high trust people who are very willing to be vulnerable. Here's things that I know and don't know. Here's the limits to my expertise. Willing to also talk about, hey, here is what I have expertise at. Just being more open, period. And so actually part of what even got me thinking about this is you, in that you are one of the highest trust lawyers that I know. And, working with you, getting to know you has been very easy for that reason, that you just from the beginning, we, worked together, that you had a lot of trust. And so does that resonate for you, this trust dimension? And if so, it sounds like you have potential for not going the high trust route, but ended up going a high trust route. So is that something that you feel like was a conscious decision, or a cumulative of a number of conscious decisions? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, I think it's something that we were talking about earlier on, actually, before we started recording. But this idea that you're more likely to be less trustworthy when you don't know someone, or you don't know what's motivating them. And it's been so important for me in building trust to get to know people. So the people that I'm working with, the opposing counsel, like the court system, all of that, once I understand who the person is that I'm talking to, it helps me build a lot of trust. So like, Hora, when we got to know each other, like I learned about Emma, I learned about your kiddo, I learned where you are, what motivates you at Freshwater Counsel, right, to do what you're doing. And all of that like resonated with me, and I understood who you were as a person, right? And I was able to trust you with this career transition process, right? Because I'm like, I know Horam, right? Like I know who he is and I know where his values are. And also your posts on LinkedIn, right, help me understand like what you care about as a recruiter and how thoughtful you are about that. But translating that over, like I attended this like transition to leadership training that Goodwin runs. It was run by this Harvard Business School professor, and he was talking about managing junior lawyers on your team and how you do that successfully. And one thing that resonated with me was just like, when you're giving assignments, you want to know what's going on in that person's life when you're giving them an assignment, right? Like you want to know, like, are they planning a wedding? Like, do they have kids? Are they staffed on other matters? Like, how busy are they? Right. You want to know all of that about the people that you're working with so that you can set realistic expectations and have more trust when you're giving them an assignment, that it's within their capability to get it done. Right. And that they're motivated to do it. And, this professor was saying like lawyers don't take enough time to do that. And it stuck with me, right? Cause, being at Goodwin and working on larger teams now, right? You often find yourself working with other lawyers, and you need to figure out, like, you need to take the time to identify who those people are, right? And learn about them so that you can trust them when you're doing assignments. And I think that translates over into everything. And it's something that I like to do, meet people, right? Like it's, so it comes sort of natural to me. And I guess another thing I would say is like the opposite, right? Like the opposite, not being able to trust anyone, is sort of like a dark place. And do you want to, like, question is, do you really want to practice like that? And like for me, like I want to be a litigator. This is my career. I really enjoy it. Like, I do not want to be in a place where I'm not trusting the people around me, or opposing counsel, right? Like, I'm going to verify when I need to verify. I'm going to check, but I'm going to trust that, the people that I'm with, or the people that I'm surrounding myself with, are going to act with integrity and advocate for their clients and, do all those things that we're supposed to do as lawyers. So it makes the practice more enjoyable and sustainable for me.
I think part of it too for me has been that I've been able to trust more the more confidence I have in my skill set. And so I didn't really have a lot of confidence in myself as a patent litigator. I was mediocre at best. And so, but as a legal recruiter in particular, I think I really feel it's been a culmination of my interest and skill set of, like you're saying, being very people centric. And let's say community centric. And so, I think there too is a virtuous cycle of confidence in your abilities and then ability to trust other people. Because I think where a lot of low trust stems from is an insecurity about not wanting to be seen as a rube or incompetent or whatever. And so then not being able to trust other people and putting walls up because you don't want to be, the wall is, it's intended so that people don't see that you're not doing your work, but then it's a two-way street because you can't see them and coordinate with them.
Yeah.
So for you, I mean, it sounds like you got some early feedback that you were good at what you did. You were taking that deposition very early on. Did you feel, if mastery is maybe, I think mastery is a process, not really an outcome. Yes, at some level, yes, there's stopping points along the way. On a journey, there's a stopping point, a scenic view, say, look how far I've come. So maybe it's like that. But would you say that you started to feel mastery pretty early on in that way?
Mm. There were certain skills that I felt more competent at earlier in my career, and some that I needed to build. So I didn't feel a lot of I felt very competent at depositions early on. It felt like a natural fit to me. If you talk to my friends from high school, they'd say like Laura's always into this like one-on-one interrogation thing. Like it was something that I enjoyed doing. And, but some of that may be I had like a false confidence because the more and more I've practiced depositions and, reviewed my transcripts and talked to other people, who are more senior, than me at deposing witnesses, like you learn there's a lot of room to grow. Right. So yeah, there's some comfort in that skill, but, recognizing there's room to grow there too. And some of the skills that were less readily available was something like, standing up in court and, doing oral argument. For a while, I just didn't understand what the purpose of that argument was, right? Like I understood the court had the briefs, right? The court could ask questions if they had it, but, we've put everything into the briefs that the court needed to know, like what's the purpose of oral argument? And I think as, a junior lawyer, like I would try to like memorize all the law and, have it readily available and kind of like run through the law for the court. And the more times I've been able to stand up in court and do oral argument, like I realized like that I was overcomplicating it. Like the point of oral argument is to simplify the message, right? Where a brief is 30 pages, like oral argument is, I mean, really, like the court has a limited attention span. So you need to pick, it's your opportunity to highlight, strengths of your client's case and to simplify it, right? And make it easy to understand. So the court, like your client's case makes sense. And so anyway, it did not come easily to me early on. But I've gotten more used to it and I really like it. Now I really like being able to stand up in court.
Let's make an analogy. Okay. So in a brief, maybe you have several arguments and then an oral argument and you've organized them in terms of importance and that's clear. But then, as I say, there's something about oral argument where you can really simplify and clarify maybe your strongest argument, and maybe that's your approach. Is there an analog to career? Now, you mentioned, hey, there's some things I was stronger at, some things I wasn't as strong at. One approach would be shoring up the things you aren't as strong at. Another approach would be doubling down on things you're strong at, and making for yourself a simple story about who you are. And here's a simple story about who I am and what I'm good at. And that's the thing I'm pursuing. So is that the route that you take professionally, or has it been more multi-pronged and like a multi-pronged, approach to professional development?
So what I've started to do is think through, I don't know if it was on your podcast or another podcast I was listening to, but someone said you have to pay attention to the problems that you work on that energize you. Like if you're working on a problem that you just feel like demoralized and you don't want to do it, like, and you're struggling with that and of engaging with it, then maybe that's not the type of work that you should be doing. But if you have a problem that is like when you're working on it, you're energized to, you like doing it, you like focusing on that, that's where you should focus your attention. And like for me, depositions, obviously I really enjoy that process, like figuring out how to deal with a difficult witness and get admissions. That's something that I could do like in my free time. Like I really like that stuff. And then, oral argument, standing up and presenting and simplifying an argument. That's also something that motivates me. So it's like, I'm not focused on one thing in particular in terms of the way I advocate, but it's like, I've been paying attention to the things that I really enjoy doing. And I'm allowing my career to grow around those things. Yeah, so that's sort of how I'm approaching. I don't know if that answers the question, but
that's a really good answer. And I think that explains what I'm doing myself, where, before law school, I was the president of my undergrad alumni chapter. And in that, I cared about, I was pretty new to Chicago, so it was my way of meeting people. That was like my lens on meeting people. It was like a small enough, tractable enough group of people. Wasn't an overwhelming number of people, so it was like, I think in many ways ideal. And so then I had to organize these events and I had to learn how to network with professionals of peers or other alums with varying, professional success and seniority. And so that was my first exposure to networking, the concept of networking. And so I taught myself networking through that. And because of that, then, when I went to choose law school, I was able to choose law school where I had a full scholarship, but it was going to be in Chicago. And so I said, okay, well, I could do that or the partial scholarship for, the very strong state school that we have in Illinois. So I went with the Chicago one because I'm like, hey, I'll be downtown Chicago. I'll be able to network this new thing that I just learned. And so I was excited about putting that into action. And so then I networked my way into big law. And then I networked my way from there to my lateral move to your now practice. So this core skill set of networking has been with me for years. And of course, it's the core skill set that facilitates my work today as a legal recruiter. And so I could be getting better and better at that. And there's so much more room for me to be getting better and better in that. But I think to my surprise, I found, I didn't ever expect myself to be a manager, but now I've made a couple recent hires. And so now I've found myself to be a manager. And yeah, I think that is energizing me. And so you have just explained to me why I'm making the decisions that I'm doing, because I just didn't really understand in myself, wait, why am I pursuing these things instead of doubling down on things that are already strengths? I think because I have gotten to say 80% of where I'd want to be, let's say. And yeah, there's a lot more value I could be getting out of pushing it up to 100% or 90%. And arguably maybe even arguably a higher ROI activity given how far that skill set's gotten me. And yeah, we're human beings and we have to be motivated by things. And so I have found something else that is, high ROI in a different dimension. That maybe I think also we can be surprised by what turns out to be high ROI in the long run. You don't know in advance. So I think it is a good idea to round out some of your skills. Yeah. So again, I think I really like your idea of pursuing what is interesting to you in that phase, because careers are long, right? And so there's,
Yeah.
no need to feel like it's some sort of whack-a-mole thing where you're just having to master everything all at once. Like you just pursue something for some period of time and say, okay, what's the next thing I want to pursue?
Yeah. No, and like I think I put a lot of pressure on myself earlier in my career to like be the best trial litigator and present that way, right? And then, over time I've got given myself more grace and realized like you said, careers are long, right? And like a group of us were talking about this case and we're like pointing out that the lead lawyers were all in their mid 60s, right? The lead lawyers and so you think like to get to the peak of your career, right? It takes some time to build up like the comfort, the connections, right? The facility with the law and the way you're arguing and like giving yourself the grace to do that, right? But, like you said, recognizing that it's going to be a long time. So if you're just like constantly like hitting your head against the wall, not enjoying what you're doing, like that's misery, right? You don't want to practice that way. And so you have to think about like what you're going to enjoy and then give yourself the grace to get better at it.
Can we go back to your approach for getting admissions out of a hostile witness? What can you share some of your trade secrets there? What's your approach?
Um, well, let's see. I think patience is very important and knowing the documents is very important. And also, listening and following up on the answers. Let's see. I'm just throwing things out now and, and also watching the witnesses' body language and whether they want to tell you more, from their answer. I found that all very important. I also think it's really important to be in the room with the witness. This is something people have been debating more in the post-pandemic period, but I do think it's really important to be in the same room. Horam, you may not believe it, but I once had a witness where I was so in tune with them that I knew when they needed to go to the bathroom. And we just kind of look at each other like, okay, can we get a break? Like we were very in tune. And that witness actually asked me to go out to lunch after the deposition because we're just like on the same page.
Wow.
And I think that ability to like read body language, like get in the same headspace as them, understand what they're coming from, like read all their documents, right? I think that you can be very effective at getting good admissions from that. So that's what I've done. I think it works.
Mm-hmm. I think something else that ties into, working on this concept from Steve Sussman's like, hey, like there's no reason why you have to wait to acquire skills. So something that, you haven't waited on is business development. That's something that you've taken seriously. You've originated, clientele and work. Tell me about how you came to want that and then how you pursued it.
Yeah. So great. So as I got further along in my career, I looked around at the partners that I was working with and I recognized the confidence that partners had when they were able to develop their own business, right? And their own client relationships. And I knew that I wanted that. I wanted to be the person that a client could call, and that I'd be their contact. I'd be if they had an issue, like they knew they could call me, and I thought I'd be good at it because I'm calm, like I'm understanding. So I knew I wanted to do that. And I'll just do an aside. When I was clerking, my co-clerk, Abigail Urquhart, her dad is Bill Urquhart, and she would have us, they're extremely generous. Abigail's extremely generous. Her dad, who's passed, is extremely generous. And he'd have us clerks over, and the way they opened up their house, that, like, very moving to me, actually. The way they opened up their house to us, and the way her dad talked about client development is like bringing people in to be part of the family. That always stuck with me, and how important that is to do that. And so I saw, that was my first kind of interaction, personal interaction with a big law partner while I was clerking, and to witness what he did, and how he handled that with his family was really inspiring to me. And so I always kept that in mind as something that I wanted to do when I was thinking about client development. But, being a first generation lawyer, I didn't have people in my family who were lawyers, or even like people who had the means to hire lawyers to do the type of work that we did. And so looking forward in my career, it was huge, like it was a question, like, how was I going to do this? I wanted to do it, but how? I didn't think I had a network, that would just organically feed me business. So I had, this great fortune of a friend from college, referred me to, her friend, Megan Sinise at Stage, who she has her own business where she, works with, senior associates, junior partners in figuring out how to develop business and how to network. And like some of the ideas that have come from my meetings with Megan are just like, I love them. I find them like, it makes networking make sense to me. So in the way that we talked about, like doing things that, you find joy in and that you like doing. I mean, networking, working with Megan has become one of those things, right? So one of the things we talked about was, this idea. I still go to these like big bar association events, right? And you sort of feel like, there's tons of people in the room. Like, how am I going to get to know anyone? But this is how I'm supposed to network. This is how I'm supposed to meet people. And, with Megan, like her idea was, okay, like let's set some specific goals around those big events. Like maybe it's 2 or 3 people I want to get to know well enough at that event to follow up with them and network. Okay. That's the goal. It's not like meeting everyone in the room or passing business cards, like having a tangible goal when you go there. So we talked about that, but then also like, how can we develop our own networking events, right? Like you don't have to rely on the bar association to develop your networking events. You can invite people over your house for dinner. You can organize like a price fixed dinner at a restaurant and coordinate people to come together. And so taking ownership of some of that networking, it was like, oh, like a light bulb, like, okay, as a first gen lawyer, like this is something that I can do, right? I can definitely do this. And I like going to dinner. I like having people over my house, right? I like all these things. So, once I started to work with her, I recognized that client development, was something that I could do even as a more junior lawyer, and that I like doing. And so I've been, doing it more regularly.
Yeah, and I have to thank, again, on the topic of high trust, I think that's, I have to thank Megan because she's the one who introduced us. And so she was high trust in that she had identified me based on, my LinkedIn posts, and because we didn't know each other at all. And then you in turn trusted her and trusted me, when we connected. So it was this really nice experience of this like virtuous cycle of trust that we all experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any relationship between the things you learned, maybe from Megan or generally in business development, that have impacted how you practice?
Yes. So, there's this concept of taking ownership, right? Taking ownership of, taking ownership and being proactive. That has been very important for how I practice. So, uh, take something like client development. I had always thought that, client development meant a partner taking an interest in you and introducing you to their clients and you building a client relationship with them through that. And then when that partner, leaves the practice, that you would take on that relationship. And that's what client development meant, right? To me. And it didn't feel like I had a lot of control over that process at that time. Like, the partner had to see something in you, through something that you've done. Like, the client had to like you, but maybe, they just had to like you for who you were. You didn't have to do anything, right? And working with Megan, I've realized, there's a whole lot more that you can do if that's the path you choose, right? If that's the path you choose to make that successful, um, uh, right? Like, you can be the one that is reaching out to the partner, right? And reminding them of the things that you've done or the things that you want to do, right? And telling them, hey, I'm thinking about this particular contact. Do you have any ideas for how to connect with them or whatever? And you being the one that's putting that on your plate to reach out. And apart from that, just like not relying exclusively on someone to take an interest in you, right? Starting to develop your own network and personal contacts and posting on LinkedIn and becoming a person who talks about the issues that you care about. And like all of that is within your ownership, your ability to do that. And I think that's like so important. Like, things don't happen to you. You can take them on yourself. And I've learned that through the process of iterating with Megan and figuring out what's going to work for me. And like just applying that to litigation, right? Like, you can, something basic as like, you can think the judge knows the law, right? Like they know patent infringement law, like they know the way it works, but, the way you present it, right? Like, and the aspects of the law that you highlight can influence that person, right? So like, what can you do to influence the way that the judge thinks? And taking back some of that ownership of it. Like you said, advocating in every way that you can, right? I think that's working with Megan has allowed me to kind of realize how much ownership I have over, the trajectory of various aspects of my career.
Mm-hmm. And then tell me about what led you to Goodwin. I mean, you're growing and progressing at Susman, getting this great trial experience. What even had you considering making a change, and then how did you ultimately land on Goodwin in patent litigation?
Yeah. So, Nick Spear, the person I talked to you about earlier, who, kind of introduced me to Susman, told me at the time that he advised me, think about your career in 3-year chunks. And think about what you want to get from your career in those 3-year chunks. And when you're thinking about different career choices, think about them in that way. Like, which choice will best position me after this period of time? Like, 3 years is an arbitrary number, but think about it in a chunk. And, when I had my second son, Bennett, I committed to myself that I was going to start that process of thinking through the next stage of my career. So I think I had 4 years under my belt at Susman at that point in time. I was in my 5th year, and I committed myself to thinking through, okay, I want to make partner, and I want to litigate. Where will I do that? That will make me, the most effective, that will let me grow. So I did a lot of that conversation in the year. So Bennett was born January 1st. So I kind of let that be my motivation, and then did a lot of thinking with friends and colleagues and partners and different people. And I don't think we started working together until like November at the end of that year. So it had taken some time. And like there were things that I wanted to look for the next part of my career that were really important. One was this idea of like being a partner to business, like having being a lawyer that understands the way that business works and that can help a business move from various aspects of their career. This idea of partnership and getting to know the people at the client that you're working for was really important to me. So, and then the second thing that I was looking for was just like collaboration within the organization. So, multifaceted teams of science advisors, people of various parts of their career, and this emphasis on collaboration and mentorship, that I thought would help me grow as a lawyer, right? From where I was and like into a career. And then, the IP focus, like I'd always been very interested in science and technology, and having done a couple of IP cases at Susman, it was something that I wanted to do a deep dive in and focus on, because it was just like interesting. And also I recognized that if you become really skilled at the law, you can go far with that in terms of client development. And also, like, I saw my expertise as being someone who could translate technical terms into more simpler concepts. And that process lended itself well to IP litigation, where you often have to like translate technical concepts in a patent to translate them to a jury. So those are the types of things that I was looking for. And I was sort of open to that when we started working together. And then, and through that process, you introduced me to different firms, and helped me think through like what were the strengths of some of the firms, the people that I was hoping to connect with in the different departments, in the units. And Goodwin was just a great fit for those things that I was looking for. Having such a large business law department that takes companies like from, their early stages all the way through their IPOs and all the growth, and that collaboration between business law and litigation was something I was like, oh, this could be a really nice fit, right? Because I could see myself as a counselor, right? As someone who's like helping long-term clients, right? And in the collaboration, I know there's a focus at Goodwin on cross-unit collaboration and mentorship, and promoting professional growth. There are tons of workshops and trainings as you come along. I've at least done a public speaking workshop, and then this transition to leadership workshop. So that's all like I can see like huge benefits from that in my career, like growing and growing and growing. And then the IP focus, like IP litigation unit at Goodwin, is just like very tight knit. We do a lot of different cases, trademark, patent, copyright. And the group is very, I remember talking to Neil and Brett about wanting to develop a litigation unit that has a lot of people who are focused on science, but also has these general litigators who can go in between. And like the fact that you have this mix in this business unit has been really, nice for me. And so it just worked out. It was a great fit. And it was, very difficult, to make that decision, like having felt at home, at Susman and loving the people there and loving my colleagues there. But I did take the leap, and I'm really happy. So
it seems to me that part of your story is inverting things that facially seem like weaknesses into strengths. So like the fact that you're first gen, didn't have a community embedded, then you said, okay, well then I want to create that. So then with business development, same thing. Like, okay, well, I don't have somebody who's just going to hand off, whether or not this concept that there's a fiction that someone's going to hand off this business to you, that there are some people do come with relationships or embedded in some sort of social ecosystem that's going to facilitate that. And And then also, let's say this point about the not having a technical background, in any number of other patent practices, they just say just from the outright, no, we don't want anyone who doesn't have a technical background. But you have inverted that into a strength to say, hey, the fact that I don't have a technical background means I'm not going to get hung up in the minutiae and the details. I can see the big picture and simplify the story. So it seems that there's been a recurring theme throughout your career is inverting weaknesses to strengths. I don't know if that resonates for you.
I think, yeah, I guess so. I mean, but the other thing is like, you see a problem, right? Like I see a problem of IP litigation for jury trials, right? In particular. And, maybe, and you have to think about your audience, right? Like maybe you need technical litigators if you're at the PTO, right? And you have patent examiners and you're talking to them and they have science backgrounds and they're steeped in the science, right? But if you are talking to a jury, right, like of 12 people who are randomly selected, right, who have no background in patent litigation or, the specific science that you're talking about, you need people who also are new to the science, right, like and have a fresh perspective to translate that over. And so I guess it's an opportunity, right? And I listened to the podcast with Moaz Kaba, and he talked about it in the same way. It's like you see a gap and there's an opportunity there to fill it, right? Like to find there's a need here. This is something that I can do, right? That nobody else is doing. And there's a huge growth opportunity there. So that's kind of the way I've seen it, is just like, yes, maybe it some could consider it a deficit, but I think it's just because it's not there already doesn't mean that it's not going to be hugely valuable. So I guess I think you're right.
Do you consider yourself strategic, and do you consider yourself ambitious, and has either of those values changed over time?
This is very funny that you asked this question, because I had this conversation with Megan. I think we dedicated like 2 of our monthly sessions to it, where she said, you're highly strategic. And I took offense to that. I was like, what does that mean? Like, I mean, I'm not calculating. I'm not, Machiavellian, right? And that's the way I had interpreted that word. And she's like, absolutely not. She's like, you have to own that word. You have to take that word back. Like, being strategic just means like being thoughtful and thinking through what your skills are and how they match up to what you want to do. And so I would absolutely say that I've done that work, right? Like I've thought about, going back to like what I enjoyed doing as a kid and what I liked doing as a kid, and what I value for my own work and what I like about that, and thinking through those skills and matching them to the type of work that I want to do, right? Like I want to do, I've narrowed it as we go, right? Like being an IP litigator who focuses on jury trials is a strategic decision that I've made based on an evaluation of my personality, my particular skill set. And like, I could have done any number of things, and this is where I've landed, because I've thought through it. Right. So, and maybe later in my career, I'll think about something different, but I think this is a great match for where I am right now.
And what about ambition? Being ambitious?
Yes. What comes to mind is this idea of like being a gunner in law school, and you never want to be the gunner.
Yep.
So it's like, oh God, am I going to just admit to being a gunner? But I like, you have to be ambitious to stay this long in big law. Like you have to want something more for your career. You have to have a vision. And so, yeah, I do think I'm ambitious.
What do you see for yourself in the next 6 months? What are you excited about in the next 6 months?
So I'm very excited about continuing to build relationships with other lawyers at Goodwin, in the IP litigation unit and in our business law department. it's very important for me to feel at home someplace to continue to build those relationships. So that's where I'm focused on. And then, more and more training, more and more exposure to jury trials. I'm looking for any cases that are like that, right? Like that are going to trial. And I've been thinking about how to take advantage of my proximity now being downtown to the district court. So, thinking about spending some time there, continuing to network with, Judge Gutierrez, who's now moved to JAMS and picking his brain about different things. And I'm also going to take a NITA training, National Institute for Trial Advocacy training in February to continue to develop my trial skills. So I'm excited about all those things.
That's a good mix. Well, Lora, I'm glad that we sat down to talk to share your story, because I think it's so inspirational for so many, first gen or otherwise. And I really admire the way that you approach practice. You are extremely hardworking and down to earth, but then also you do have this strategy and ambition as well. So it's an amazing cocktail. And so I'm really excited to see what your trajectory looks like in the coming years.
Thank you so much, Harm. You said you're putting your bet on me, and I just want to make you proud. So, thanks so much for taking the time to sit with me and interview with me. I've really enjoyed it, and I regret that our time is up, but I'm glad we did it too.